I was ready to divorce my wife until I overheard what she told her friends about me. There's a specific kind of silence that fills a home when love is dying. It's not the comfortable quiet of two people who've run out of things to say cause they already know each other so well. It's not the peaceful hush of a Sunday morning spent reading separate sections of the newspaper in companionable stillness. No, this silence is different. It's thick, suffocating, the kind that presses against your chest and makes you hold your breath just to avoid disturbing it. Because disturbing it means acknowledging it. And acknowledging it means admitting that something has gone terribly, irreversibly wrong. That was the silence that lived in our house for 6 months before I finally decided to leave. My name is Marcus. I'm 42 years old and I was married to Allah Chen for 14 years before I typed divorce attorney near me into my phone search bar at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday in March. The cursor blinked at me in the darkness of our guest bedroom where I'd been sleeping for 3 weeks by then. And I remember thinking that this was it. This was how it ended. Not with screaming or thrown dishes or dramatic declarations. Just me alone in a room that smelled faintly of lavender potpourri that Isla had placed on the dresser years ago, googling lawyers while my wife slept 20 feet away in what used to be our bedroom. If you've ever felt like a ghost in your own life, you know what I'm talking about. That sensation of walking through rooms you used to fill with presence and realizing that no one would notice if you simply stopped existing there. And that's what the 6 months after I lost my job felt like. I was a senior project manager at a mid-sized tech firm in Seattle. Decent salary, good benefits. The kind of job that allowed us to buy a 3-bedroom house in Ballard with a view of the Sound if you stood on your toes in the upstairs bathroom. The kind of job that made me feel like I was doing something right, like I was building something, providing something, being something. And then in the span of a 15-minute meeting with HR, I wasn't. Market conditions, they said, restructuring, they explained. It's not personal, they assured me, as if there was any way to make being erased from an organization you'd given 8 years of your life to feel impersonal. They gave me a severance package and a cardboard box for my desk items. And I walked out of that building on a gray February afternoon, feeling like I'd been surgically removed from my own identity. I told that evening. We were in the kitchen, her chopping vegetables for a stir fry, me standing in the doorway with my cardboard box still in my hands like some cliché from a movie about corporate casualties. They let me go, I said. Her knife stopped mid-chop. She turned to look at me, her dark eyes scanning my face for what? Signs of devastation? Anger? I'm not sure what she was looking for, but whatever she saw made her set the knife down carefully, wipe her hands on a towel, and cross the kitchen to hug me. Oh, Marcus, she whispered into my shoulder. I'm so sorry. I remember that hug. How her hair smelled like the jasmine shampoo she'd used since we first started dating. How her arms felt strong and certain around me. How for just a moment I felt like maybe we'd be okay because we were and we had always figured things out before. But that moment passed quickly and what replaced it was something I didn't recognize until much later. The first crack in the foundation. We'll figure it out, she said, pulling back to look at me. You'll find something better. This might even be a blessing in disguise. A blessing in disguise. That phrase would echo in my head for months afterward when growing more bitter each time because I didn't find something better. I didn't find anything at all. The job market in tech had contracted just enough that dozens of people with my exact qualifications were all competing for the same handful of positions. I sent out applications every day. It worked. I reached out to former colleagues. I optimized my LinkedIn profile and practiced interview responses and did everything the career counselor from the unemployment office told me to do, and I got nowhere. 1 month passed, then 2, then 3, the severance money dwindled. I started calculating how long our savings would last. Allah was a physical therapist at a clinic downtown and her salary was solid, but it wasn't enough to cover both the mortgage and all our other expenses indefinitely. We'd always been a 2-income household. We'd built our life on the assumption that we'd both keep working, both keep contributing, both keep pulling our weight. Now I was dead weight, and I could feel it in every interaction we had. Did you hear back from that startup you interviewed with? She'd ask over dinner, her tone carefully neutral, like she was trying not to pressure me, but also desperately needed good news. Not yet, I'd say, even though I knew not yet was code for they went with someone else and haven't bothered to send the rejection email. Okay, she'd respond. And then there would be that silence again, that terrible assessing silence that made me feel like I was being weighed and measured and found wanting. I stopped going to the gym because we'd canceled the membership to save money. I stopped meeting friends for drinks because I couldn't afford to split the tab. I stopped doing a lot of things actually, including most of the things that had made me feel like myself. Instead, I spent my days in a kind of purgatory. I'd wake up after Isa left for work, make coffee, sit at the desk in what we called the office, but was really just a converted spare bedroom, and send out applications until my eyes glazed over. Then I'd scroll through job listings I'd already seen. Then I'd refresh my email. Then I'd check LinkedIn. Then I'd spiral into reading articles about the changing job market and automation and age discrimination and wonder if at 42 I was already obsolete. By the time Isla got home around 6:30, I'd have dinner started because what else did I have to do? And I'd try to act like I'd had a productive day. But she could see through it. I know she could. I could see her seeing through it, which somehow made it worse. "How's your day?" she'd ask, setting her bag down by the door. "Fine," I'd lie. "Sent out some applications, had a phone screen." "That's good," she'd say. But her voice carried this exhausted quality, like she was tired of offering encouragement that led nowhere. We stopped talking about my job search after a while. We stopped talking about a lot of things. Intimacy became a memory. Not just sex, though that disappeared too, gradually and then completely, but the small intimacies that make a marriage feel like a partnership rather than a cohabitation arrangement. We stopped touching each other in passing, stopped asking about each other's days in any meaningful way, stopped laughing at each other's jokes. I'd see her in the morning before she left for work, her face already set in the professional mask she wore for patience, and I'd think, "I don't know who you are anymore." Worse, I'd think I don't know who I am anymore. That's the thing about losing your job when your identity is wrapped up in what you do. I wasn't just unemployed. I was untethered. I was a project manager who didn't manage projects. A provider who didn't provide. A husband who was failing at the one thing I'd always thought I'd be able to do, take care of my family. We didn't have kids. A and I had talked about it early in our marriage, but we'd always found reasons to wait. She wanted to establish her career. I wanted us to be more financially secure. We wanted to travel more first. There was always something, some reason to postpone. And eventually, the conversation just stopped happening. Now, I was grateful we'd waited 'cause at least we didn't have children watching their father dissolve into irrelevance. But that gratitude came with its own poison. The knowledge that if we did divorce, it would be clean. No custody battles, no child support calculations, no little faces we'd have to explain things to. Just the house to sell, the assets to divide, and two people walking away from 14 years like it had been a lengthy but ultimately concluded experiment. I started thinking about divorce seriously sometime around the 4-month mark of unemployment. Not because of any single incident, not because we fought. We barely fought at all actually, which in hindsight was part of the problem. No, I started thinking about divorce because I could feel us becoming strangers and I didn't know how to stop it. I'd watched Isla get ready for work in the morning and she'd move through the routine with such efficiency, such complete lack of acknowledgement of my presence that I felt like I was watching her through a window rather than standing in the same room. She'd shower, dress, dry her hair, apply minimal makeup, just enough to look polished and gather her things. All while I sat on the edge of the guest bed pretending to look at my phone. "See you tonight," she'd say from the doorway, not quite meeting my eyes. "Yeah, see you," I'd respond. And she'd be gone, and I'd sit there wondering when exactly we'd become people who said, "See you tonight," instead of, "I love you." I should have said something. I should have stopped her one morning and asked, "Are we okay? Are we still we?" But I didn't because I was afraid of the answer. Because what if she said no? What if she confirmed what I already suspected? That she was staying out of obligation, out of some sense of loyalty to vows we'd made 14 years ago when we were different people who couldn't have imagined this version of us. So instead, I let the silence grow and I started noticing things. Small things at first. The way she'd take her phone into the bathroom when she showered, which she'd never done before. The way she'd tilt the screen away from me if I walked past while she was texting. The way she started working late more often. Coming home at 8 or 9 instead of 6:30, smelling like the outside world. Rain and wind and a life I wasn't part of. "Busy at the clinic?" I'd ask, trying to keep my voice casual. "Yeah, we're understaffed," she'd say, which might have been true or might have been a lie. I didn't know anymore, and I didn't trust myself to know. I told myself I was being paranoid. That unemployment had made me suspicious and insecure, that there was no reason to think Isa was being unfaithful just because she seemed distant. But the thought once planted grew roots. I started paying closer attention, noting patterns. She'd check her phone constantly, even during dinner. She'd smile at messages I couldn't see. She'd take calls in the other room, speaking in low tones I couldn't quite make out. And maybe worst of all, she seemed happier. Not when she was with me. With me, she was still that exhausted, distant version of herself. But in general, she had this energy about her, this lightness that I hadn't seen in months. It made me feel sick because if she was happier and I was the main variable that had changed in her life, or rather the variable that had become less less employed, less confident, less present. Then what did that say? What was I supposed to conclude? I didn't want to be the kind of person who spied on his wife. I really didn't. But desperation makes you do things you never thought you'd do. So, one day after she left for work, I went into our bedroom, her bedroom really, since I'd been exiled to the guest room. And I looked around. I didn't even know what I was looking for. Evidence, proof, some concrete thing I could point to and say, this is why everything feels wrong. Her nightstand held a book about trauma recovery and physical therapy techniques. Her dresser was neat, organized, completely ordinary. Her closet showed no signs of secret date outfits or hidden lingerie. I felt like an intruder in what had once been my own space, and I felt pathetic for being there at all. But then I saw her journal. Allah had kept a journal for as long as I'd known her. Nothing dramatic or daily diary-ish, just occasional entries when she needed to process things. She'd told me about it early in our relationship, back when we were still learning each other's rhythms and secrets, and she'd even read me a few entries once, sweet things about trips we'd taken, thoughts about her career goals. The journal was on her nightstand, a leather-bound notebook with a ribbon bookmark. And I knew that reading it would be a violation, that whatever trust we had left would evaporate the moment I opened that cover. But I picked it up anyway, my hands shaking slightly, and I told myself, I just checked the most recent entry just to see, just to know. I opened to the marked page and started reading. The entry was dated 3 days ago. I don't know how much longer I can do this. Every day feels like pretending, like I'm playing the role of a supportive wife, when really I just feel empty. Marcus won't even look at me anymore. He won't talk to me. I really talk. I mean, not just the surface level exchanges about groceries or bills. It's like he's already left, even though I'm like he's still here physically. And I'm trying so hard to be patient, to give him space to figure things out. But I'm drowning, too. I'm drowning in the silence we've created. And I don't know how to break it without breaking everything else. I stopped reading. My hands were shaking harder now. And I felt like I was going to be sick. She wasn't having an affair. She was just hurting. Hurting in the same way I was hurting maybe, but from a different angle. And I'd been so wrapped up in my own pain, my own sense of failure that I hadn't even considered that she might be struggling, too. I put the journal back exactly where I'd found it. And I left the room feeling worse than when I'd entered. Because now I had confirmation that I wasn't just imagining the distance between us. It was real. We were both drowning, both pretending, both trapped in this terrible cycle of silence and assumption. And I still didn't know how to fix it. So, I did what seemed logical at the time, which in retrospect was possibly the worst decision I could have made. I decided that maybe the kindest thing, the most honest thing, would be to just end it. To stop dragging out this painful dissolution and give us both permission to start over. I found a family law attorney with good reviews and scheduled a consultation. I didn't tell Allah. I told myself I was just exploring options, but I knew I was lying to myself. I was ready to sign papers and divide assets and tell people that it just didn't work out, which is what people say when they're too tired to explain the 1,000 small cuts that bled a marriage dry. The consultation was on a Thursday afternoon. The attorney's office was downtown in one of those buildings with 2 bright fluorescent lighting and generic landscape paintings on the walls. The attorney herself, a woman in her 50s named Patricia Kowalski, was kind but direct. "How long have you been married?" she asked, pen poised over a legal pad. 14 years. "Children?" "No." "Shared assets, a house, cars, savings accounts, what's left of them?" "The usual." She nodded, making notes. "And is this an amicable separation? Are you both in agreement?" I hesitated. I haven't told her yet that I'm filing. Patricia looked up at me, her expression neutral, but assessing. "Mr. Chen, it's Marcus. Marcus Holland." Issa kept her last name. "Marcus. Then I need to be clear with you about something. Washington is a no-fault state, which means you don't need a specific reason to file for divorce, and you don't need your spouse's permission. However, if this comes as a surprise to her, it can complicate matters significantly. Have you two discussed the possibility of divorce, separation, counseling?" "We've barely discussed anything." I admitted that's part of the problem. "Then I'd strongly recommend at least having a conversation with her before you file. Not for legal reasons. You have every right to proceed, but for practical and emotional ones. Divorces go more smoothly when both parties have time to process and prepare." I left the consultation with a folder full of paperwork and a sick feeling in my stomach. But I also left with determination because Patricia was right. I needed to tell Allah. I couldn't just ambush her with divorce papers. Whatever else had gone wrong between us, I owed her honesty. I planned to tell her that Friday evening. I'd rehearsed various versions of the conversation in my head, calm, rational, explaining that we'd both be happier apart, that we'd grown into different people, that sometimes love wasn't enough. But Friday came and I couldn't do it. She came home exhausted from a long week. And I looked at her, really looked at her, maybe for the first time in months, and I saw the weight she was carrying. The tiredness in her eyes, the tension in her shoulders, and I chickened out. Saturday, I told myself I'd do it Saturday, but Saturday was her friend Lauren's birthday, and Issa had plans to go to Lauren's house for dinner with a group of women I'd met a handful of times over the years. She seemed almost excited about it, which was such a rare thing to see from her lately that I didn't want to ruin it by dropping divorce talk into her afternoon. So, I told her to have fun, and she left around 5 o'clock wearing jeans and a blue sweater I'd always liked. And I was left alone in our too quiet house with my coward's guilt. I spent the evening the way I'd spent most evenings lately, cooking something simple, pasta with store-bought sauce, eating while watching YouTube videos I wouldn't remember 5 minutes later, cleaning up, and then retreating to the guest bedroom with my laptop. Around 10 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a text from Allah. Staying a bit later. Don't wait up. Short, functional. The kind of message you send to a roommate, not a spouse. I texted back, okay, have fun. And then I lay there in the guest bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about how I'd tell her the next day. Sunday morning, maybe, or Sunday afternoon. Definitely Sunday. I must have dozed off around 11 o'clock because the next thing I was aware of was the sound of the front door opening and closing. I glanced at my phone. 12:47 a.m. I heard Issa's footsteps moving through the house, slightly uneven, like maybe she'd had a couple of glasses of wine. I heard her go to the kitchen, heard the tap run, heard the familiar sounds of her nighttime routine filtering through the walls, and then I heard voices, plural. I sat up confused. Had she brought someone home? But I'd only heard the front door open once, and I would have heard multiple sets of footsteps, multiple voices saying good night. The sound was coming from the living room. Isla's voice and at least 2 others, female voices. And then I realized she'd started a video call. The walls in our house weren't thick. And the guest bedroom shared a wall with the living room. If I stayed quiet, I could hear her clearly. I should have put in headphones. Should have turned on music or gone to the bathroom or done anything other than what I did, which was sit there in the dark and listen because what I heard changed everything. I just needed to vent, Issa was saying, her voice thick with emotion. I hadn't heard from her in months. Sorry for calling so late. Don't apologize, another voice said. Lauren, I recognized. That's what we're here for. What happened? Nothing happened. That's the problem. Issa's voice cracked slightly. It's been 6 months of nothing happening. 6 months of watching him disappear, piece by piece, and I don't know how to stop it. There was a pause. Then a third voice, Jenna maybe, said gently. You're talking about Marcus? Of course I'm talking about Marcus, Issa, and I could hear her crying now, soft but unmistakable. I'm watching my husband vanish right in front of me, and I don't know what to do. He won't let me in. He barely speaks to me. He looks at me like I'm the enemy, and I don't know what I did wrong. My chest tightened. I felt like I was eavesdropping on something sacred and terrible. You didn't do anything wrong, Lauren said firmly. He lost his job, Allah. That's traumatic. He's probably depressed. I know that, Isla said, her voice raw. I know that. But what am I supposed to do? I've tried everything. I've tried giving him space. I've tried asking him how he's feeling. I've tried pretending everything's normal so he doesn't feel pressured. Nothing works. He just retreats further. Have you suggested therapy? Jenna asked. He won't go. I brought it up once and he looked at me like I'd suggested he admit himself to an institution. And I get it. I understand that men, especially men like Marcus, have this whole thing about mental health being a weakness, but watching him suffer without help is killing me. Is he looking for work? Lauren asked. Every day, Issa said, he sends out applications, he networks, he does everything right, and nothing is working. And I can see it breaking him. I can see him looking at himself like he's worthless. Like because he doesn't have a job and he's not a person anymore. And I want to shake him and tell him that I don't care about the money, that I don't care about the job, and that I just want him back. But he won't believe me. I was frozen in the guest bed, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it would give me away. Do you think he knows how you feel? Jenna asked quietly. There was a long silence. Then Isla said in a voice so small everyone almost didn't hear it. I don't think so. I think he thinks I'm judging him or that I'm disappointed in him. And maybe at first I was frustrated. Not disappointed, just frustrated because we were supposed to be partners. You know, we were supposed to figure things out together. But he shut me out so completely that I couldn't even try to help. And now what? Lauren prompted. Now I think he's given up on us. Issa whispered. He moved into the guest room. He barely looks at me. He answers in monosyllables. It's like living with a ghost who resents me for being alive. She was sobbing openly now, and I could hear her friends murmuring comfort, but I couldn't focus on their words because my mind was reeling. She thought I had given up on us. I love him, Issa said, her voice breaking. I love him so much it physically hurts. I love the man he was, and I love the man he could be again if he just let himself believe he's worth something. But I'm exhausted and I'm lonely and I don't know how much longer I can keep trying to reach someone who doesn't want to be reached. Have you thought about what comes next? Jenna asked carefully. If things don't change, another pause. Then I've thought about it, about separation, about whether staying is hurting us both more than leaving would. But I can't do it. I can't walk away. Not yet. Not when I know he's drowning and just needs someone to believe in him. But what if he never lets you? Lauren asked. What if he stays like this? Then I guess I'll have my answer. Issa said quietly. I'll know that whatever we had, whatever we built wasn't strong enough to survive but I need to know I tried everything first. I need to know that if we end, it's not because I gave up. God, Aya, Jenna said, you're stronger than I would be. I'm not strong, Allah said. I'm terrified. I'm terrified that one day I'll wake up and realize we waited too long. That we let the silence kill us. I'm terrified that he's already decided I'm not worth fighting for. And I'm terrified that I'm going to lose the only man I've ever loved because he won't let me love him. The conversation continued, but I couldn't hear it anymore over the roaring in my ears. I sat in the dark guest bedroom, my wife's words echoing in my head, and I felt like the biggest fool who'd ever lived because she just described in painful detail exactly how I'd been feeling. The fear, the loneliness, the sense that we were losing each other. But from her perspective, from the other side of the wall I'd built between us, I'd thought she was disappointed in me, resentful, distant by choice. But she was distant because I'd pushed her away. She was exhausted because she'd been trying to reach me while I retreated. She was lonely because I decided somewhere along the way that I was protecting her from my failure by not burdening her with it. I'd been so consumed by my own pain that I hadn't seen hers. And I'd been planning to serve her with divorce papers. I'd been planning to walk away from someone who loved me so much it physically hurts. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I felt nauseous, ashamed, horrified at myself. I heard her end the call, heard on her moving around the living room, and then heard her footsteps in the hallway. They paused outside the guest bedroom door. I held my breath, wondering if she'd knock, if she'd come in. If this would be the moment when everything finally broke open. But after a few seconds, she moved on and I heard the master bedroom door close softly. I lay back down, but there was no possibility of sleep. My mind was racing, replaying everything. The past 6 months, the past 14 years, every moment of silence and assumption and failure to communicate. I'd been ready to throw away my marriage because I'd assumed I knew what Issa was thinking, what she was feeling, what she wanted, and I'd been completely catastrophically wrong. The next morning, Sunday morning, the day I'd planned to tell her I wanted a divorce. I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. I couldn't undo the past 6 months. I couldn't take back the distance or the silence or the pain. But I could stop making things worse. I could stop assuming. I could stop retreating. I could start fighting for us. I found her in the kitchen making coffee, still in her pajamas. Her eyes were slightly red, and I wondered how much sleep she'd gotten. Probably not much more than me. Allah, I said from the doorway. She turned, surprise, flickering across her face. We hadn't had a real conversation in weeks. Hadn't sought each other out. This break-in pattern seemed to startle her. Yeah, she said carefully. Can we talk? Something shifted in her expression. Hope maybe mixed with weariness. Okay. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd had hundreds of meals and conversations over the years. And for a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I said, I've been a terrible husband. She started to protest, but I held up my hand. Let me finish, please. I've been terrible because I shut you out. Because I decided that my failure was something I had to carry alone. And in doing that, I made you feel like I didn't need you, like I didn't want you. And that wasn't true. It was never true. Her eyes were wide, fixed on me with an intensity I hadn't seen in months. I lost my job, I continued, my voice rough. And somewhere along the way, I lost myself, too. I let what I do become who I am. And when I didn't have that anymore, I didn't know how to be anything, especially not a husband. Especially not your husband because you deserve someone who has their life together and I felt like I was failing at everything. Marcus, I heard you last night, I said quickly before I could lose my nerve on the video call with Lauren and Jenna. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but I heard you and I heard what you said about us, about me, and I need you to know something. I took a shaky breath. I was planning to ask for a divorce, I said. I had a consultation with an attorney. I was going to tell you yesterday, but I chickened out and then I heard you last night and I realized I'd been about to make the biggest mistake of my life. Issa's face went pale. What? I thought you wanted out, I said. I thought you were staying out of obligation. I thought I was doing you a favor by letting you go, but I was wrong. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. She was crying now, tears streaming down her face, and I reached across the table to take her hands. She didn't pull away. I love you, I said, and my own voice was breaking. I love you. And I've been treating you like the enemy when you're the only person I've ever wanted on my side. And I don't know how to fix what I broke, but I want to try. If you'll let me, if it's not too late. For a long moment, she just looked at me, tears falling, and I braced myself for her to say it was too late, that I'd hurt her too badly, that she was done trying. But then she squeezed my hands and said, "It's not too late. God, Marcus, it's not too late." And then we were both crying, both holding on to each other's hands like lifelines. Both finally being honest. I didn't know what to do, she said through tears. I didn't know how to help you without making things worse. You seemed so angry all the time or so sad, and I didn't know if you wanted space or comfort or what. And I was trying so hard to be supportive without being pushy. And I think I just ended up being distant instead. You weren't distant, I said. I was. I pushed you away because I was ashamed. Because I felt like I wasn't enough anymore. You've always been enough, she said fiercely. With or without a job, with or without money, you're enough, Marcus. You're everything. We talked for 2 hours that morning. Really talked, maybe for the first time in half a year. We said things we should have said months ago. We admitted fears and resentments and pain we'd been carrying silently. We cried and apologized and started slowly to rebuild the bridge between us. It wasn't a magic fix. That conversation didn't suddenly make everything perfect, but it was a beginning. The weeks that followed were hard in different ways. I made an appointment with a therapist, something I'd been resistant to because of exactly the toxic masculinity Allah had described to her friends. But I went and I started unpacking the way I'd tied my self-worth to my career. The depression I'd been sliding into, the fear that had been driving all my worst decisions. Issa and I started couples counseling, too. We needed help navigating the damage we'd done, and we needed tools for communicating better. Our counselor, a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation to Issa, though they joked about it, was patient and insightful. You're both grieving, she told us in one of our early sessions. You're grieving the life you thought you'd have, the stability you thought you'd built, and you've been grieving separately, which made you feel alone even though you were together. She was right. We'd been in parallel pain, close enough to touch, but somehow unable to reach each other, but slowly with work, we started reaching. I stopped sleeping in the guest room. That was Allah's idea, actually. About 3 weeks after our kitchen table conversation, she stood in the doorway of the guest room while I was getting ready for bed and said, "I want you back in our room. If you want to be there, I want to be there," I said immediately. That first night back in our bed was strange. We lay there in the dark, not touching at first. Both of us hyper aware of the space between us. But then Allah reached out and took my hand and I squeezed back and it felt like something essential clicking back into place. We started small, holding hands while watching TV, cooking dinner together, asking each other real questions, and giving real answers instead of the surface level exchanges we've been trading. "How is therapy?" she'd ask. "Hard, I'd say. We talked about shame today, about how I've been carrying this belief that I'm only valuable if I'm productive. What did your therapist say? That it's a lie. That my value isn't conditional. That even if I never worked another day in my life, I'd still be a person worth loving." "She's right," Aya would say, squeezing my hand. "She's absolutely right." And slowly, so slowly, I started believing it. I kept looking for work, but with less desperation. I expanded my search beyond project management, started considering adjacent fields, even took on some freelance consulting gigs that paid barely anything, but gave me something to do, something to contribute. And somewhere around the 2-month mark after our kitchen table conversation, something shifted. I realized I was happy. Not because my circumstances had changed. I still didn't have a full-time job. We were still living carefully on Issa's salary and my dwindling savings, but because I'd stopped measuring my worth by external metrics. Because I had my wife back. Because we were building something real again. One evening about 3 months after I'd overheard that phone call, Allah and I were sitting on our back porch watching the sunset, She was curled up next to me on the old love seat we'd bought at a yard sale years ago, her head on my shoulder, my arm around her waist. "I've been thinking," she said quietly, about how close we came to losing this." I tightened my arm around her. "Me, too. I'm glad you heard me that night," she said. "I mean, I'm mortified that you heard me ugly crying to my friends about our marriage. But I'm glad because I don't think I could have said those things to you directly. Not then. I was too scared. I'm glad I heard too," I said, even though it was the most painful thing I've ever experienced. Because it was exactly what I needed to hear. That you still loved me. That you hadn't given up. That I wasn't the only one fighting to hold on. She lifted her head to look at me. "I never gave up. I was tired and sad and lonely, but I never stopped loving you. Not for a second." "I know," I said. "I know that now." She kissed me then, soft and sweet. And I felt something settle in my chest. Something that had been twisted and wrong for months. "What do you think would have happened if you hadn't heard me?" she asked after a moment. "If you'd gone through with the divorce," I considered it. "I think we both would have been miserable. I think we would have spent the rest of our lives wondering what would have happened if we just talked to each other, if we'd been braver." "I don't want to live like that," she said, avoiding hard conversations because they're uncomfortable. "Me neither," I said. "So, we make a deal. No more silence. No more assuming. If something's wrong, we say it. Even if it's scary, especially if it's scary." She held out her pinky. "Deal." I linked my pinky with hers and we sat there as the sun painted the sky orange and pink, and I thought about how close I'd come to throwing this away. I got a job offer 4 months after our kitchen table conversation. It wasn't the job I'd been expecting to get. It was with a nonprofit that did technology training for underserved communities, and the pay was about 30% less than what I'd been making before. But the work was meaningful. The team was great. And the director who hired me said something during my final interview that stuck with me. "We're not looking for someone who knows all the answers. We're looking for someone who's willing to figure things out alongside the communities we serve. Someone who's humble enough to learn." Humble. That was a word I'd learned a lot about in therapy. I took the job and I loved it almost immediately. It was different from corporate project management. Messier, less predictable, more human. But that was exactly what I needed. Isa was thrilled. Not because of the paycheck, though the financial relief helped, but because she could see I was excited about something again. "You seem like yourself," she told me one evening after I'd come home energized from a particularly good day at work. "I feel like myself," I said. "Better than myself, maybe. Like a version of me that's learned some things." "What kinds of things?" "That my value isn't about what I produce. That asking for help isn't weakness. That marriage is about being honest even when it's hard. That the person I married is the best thing that ever happened to me." And I almost let her go because I was too proud to admit I was struggling. She smiled. The real smile that reached her eyes, the one I'd missed so much during those dark months. "We almost let each other go," she corrected. "We both made mistakes, but we're here now, and that's what matters." We celebrated 1 year of recommitment, our term for the anniversary of our kitchen table conversation, by going back to the restaurant where we'd had our first date 14 years earlier. It was a small Italian place in Fremont, family-owned, with red checkered tablecloths and candles and wine bottles. "Do you remember what we talked about?" Allah asked over pasta. "On our first date?" "Vaguely, I remember being terrified you were out of my league," she laughed. "You were sweet. You asked me about my work and you actually listened. Most guys I dated just wanted to talk about themselves. And now you're stuck with a guy who talks about himself too much in therapy." "I Joe, and I'm not stuck," she said, reaching across the table to take my hand on. "I'm exactly where I want to be." We'd rebuilt something stronger than what we'd had before, I realized. Not because the foundation had been weak, but because we'd learned how to repair it together. We'd learned that silence was poison. That assumptions were dangerous. That vulnerability was strength. And we'd learned that marriage isn't about never struggling. It's about choosing to struggle together. There's a specific kind of silence that fills a home when love is healing. It's not the suffocating quiet of pain unspoken. It's not the tense absence of words that need to be said. It's the comfortable silence of two people who've run out of urgent things to say because they've already said the important things. The peaceful quiet of a Sunday morning spent reading separate sections of the newspaper in companionable stillness, knowing that if either person needs to speak, the other will listen. That's the silence that lives in our house now. I'm sitting in what used to be the guest bedroom, but is now my actual office. A helped me set it up properly with a real desk and good lighting and plants on the windowsill. I can hear her in the living room talking to a patient on the phone, giving guidance about exercises and recovery timelines in that calm, professional voice she uses. And I feel grateful. Grateful that I heard her that night. Grateful that I was brave enough to change course. Grateful that she was willing to rebuild with me. I still think about those divorce papers sometimes, about how close I came to signing them, about what my life would look like now if I had empty probably or filled with regrets I'd never quite be able to name on. But I didn't sign them. I tore them up the morning after our kitchen table conversation, standing over the recycling bin, ripping them into small pieces like I could physically destroy the future they represented. Isa found me doing it. What was that? She asked. A mistake, I said. A big one that I'm not making. She kissed my cheek and squeezed my shoulder, and that was all the acknowledgement either of us needed. We tell our story sometimes when friends are struggling, when someone mentions feeling distant from their partner or lost in their own life or hopeless about their relationship. We tell them about the silence that almost killed us. About the assumptions that nearly destroyed us, about the phone call that saved us. Communication. Isa always says that's the whole thing. Not just talking, but really communicating, saying the scary things, admitting the hard things. And listening, I add, actually listening, not just waiting for your turn to talk. Sometimes people thank us for sharing. Sometimes they look uncomfortable, like we've shown them too much. But I don't regret being honest about how close we came to the edge. 'Cause if our story helps even one couple step back from their own edge, it's worth the vulnerability. Last month, on a rainy Tuesday evening, Isla came home from work and found me in the kitchen making dinner. Chicken stir fry, one of our standards. She wrapped her arms around me from behind and rested her cheek against my back. I love you, she said, not in response to anything I'd said or done. Not prompted by an occasion or anniversary, just because. I love you, too, I said, turning in her arms to face her. More than anything, more than having a job, she teased. Way more than having a job, I said. Seriously, the job is great. But you're everything. She kissed me soft and lingering. And I thought about how different this moment was from the ones we'd had a year and a half ago when every interaction felt fraught and loaded and wrong. What made you want to tell me that? I asked. That I love you. I mean, she shrugged. I was just thinking about us, about how we almost lost each other, and I wanted to make sure you knew. I know, I said. I always know now. Good, she said. Don't forget. I won't. I promise never again. And I meant it. If you've ever felt like a ghost in your own life, I hope you know you're not alone. I hope you know that the silence isn't permanent, that the distance can be crossed, that the assumptions can be challenged. I hope you know that sometimes the scariest thing being honest about pain, about failure, about fear is also the most necessary thing. I hope you find the courage I almost didn't have to speak, to listen, to stay, to fight. Because marriage isn't about being perfect. It's not about never struggling or never doubting or never making mistakes. It's about choosing every day to show up, to be honest, to love someone even when, especially when it's hard. Isa and I aren't perfect. We still have hard days. We still disagree. We still have to work at this, at keeping the lines of communication open. But we're committed to each other, to the work, to the belief that what we have is worth fighting for. And on the hard days when I'm tempted to retreat into silence or assumption or pride, I remember that phone call. I remember hearing Isla say she loved me so much it physically hurts. I remember how close I came to walking away from that love. And I remember that I tore up those divorce papers for a reason, because some mistakes are too big to make. And losing Isla would have been the biggest mistake of my life. So instead, I choose to stay. I choose to speak. I choose to love her loudly and clearly every day for the rest of my life. And she chooses the same. That's the thing about marriage, I think. It's not about the big romantic gestures or the perfect moments or the fairy tale ending. It's about the choice, the daily deliberate, sometimes difficult choice to keep choosing each other. We choose each other every day, even on the hard days, especially on the hard days. And that makes all the difference. The rain has picked up outside, drumming against the windows in the steady rhythm that's common in Seattle autumns. I can hear Isla moving around in the kitchen now, starting dinner, even though I said I'd cook tonight. I close my laptop and head to join her. And when I enter the kitchen, she looks up and smiles. The real smile, the one that says, I'm home. Hey, she says, I thought you were working. I was, but I heard you in here and I wanted to help. You just want to make sure I don't burn the chicken like last time. She teases that, too. I admit, and she laughs. We cook together, moving around each other with the ease of people who've learned each other's rhythms. We talk about our days, the frustrating parts, the funny parts, the mundane parts. We talk about weekend plans and grocery lists, and whether we need to finally replace the bathroom faucet that's been leaking. Normal things, daily things, the small conversations that make up a life together. And as we sit down to eat, I realize this is what I almost lost. Not the big moments or the dramatic declarations, but this. The ordinary magic of sharing a meal with someone who knows you and loves you anyway. What are you thinking about? Allah asks, noticing my expression. How lucky I am, I say honestly. Sap, she says, but she's smiling. Your sap, I counter. My sap, she agrees. We eat in comfortable silence for a while and then Isa says, I saw Lauren today. She asked about us. Yeah. What did you tell her? That we're good. Really good. That the work was worth it. And what did I say? It is. She reaches across the table to squeeze my hand and I squeeze back and I think about how this simple gesture, the reaching out, the connection, the physical reminder that we're together is something I took for granted before. Something I'll never take for granted again. After dinner, we clean up together and then we settle on the couch with tea and a movie neither of us has seen. Halfway through, Isla falls asleep against my shoulder, her breathing deep and even. And I carefully extract my arm to grab a blanket and drape it over her. I should probably wake her and suggest we go to bed, but I don't. I just sit there watching her sleep, feeling the weight of her head on my shoulder, and I let myself feel grateful. Grateful for second chances. Grateful for uncomfortable truths overheard at the exact right moment. Grateful for a woman who loved me even when I made it nearly impossible. Grateful for the courage we both found to try again. The movie plays on, but I'm not watching it. I'm watching my wife and I'm thinking about all the versions of this moment that could have existed if I'd made different choices. In one version, I'm alone in an apartment somewhere eating takeout and wondering what Isa is doing, whether she's happier without me. In another version, we're going through the motions of a dead marriage, living parallel lives in the same house, too stubborn or scared to acknowledge what we've lost. But in this version, the real version, the one we fought for, we're here together, healing, growing, learning to love each other better every day. This is the version I choose. This is the version we choose. The movie ends when I gently wake Isla. Hey, sleepyhead. Let's get you to bed. She blinks at me, disoriented. I fell asleep about an hour ago. Why didn't you wake me? You looked peaceful, I say. And I liked sitting with you. She smiles, still half asleep, and takes my hand as we head to the bedroom. We go through our nighttime routine, brushing teeth, changing into pajamas, setting alarms with the kind of coordination that comes from years of practice. And then we're in bed in the dark and Isla curls up against me like she's been doing for the past year. And I wrap my arm around her and I think this is everything. Marcus, she murmurs. Yeah. Thank you for what? For staying, for fighting, for loving me enough to tear up those papers. I kiss the top of her head. Thank you for giving me a reason to always, she whispers. And as we drift off to sleep, I make a silent promise to the universe, to Allah, to myself. I will never take this for granted again. I will never let silence replace honesty. I will never assume I know what she's thinking instead of asking. I will never retreat when things get hard. I will show up. I will be present. I will love her out loud every day for the rest of my life. Because that's what marriage is. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of commitment. Not the lack of problems, but the willingness to face them together. Not perfection. Just persistence and love. So much love. 1 year later, I'm standing in our kitchen on a Sunday morning making pancakes while Isla sits at the table reading something on her tablet. Sun streams through the windows catching the dust motes floating in the air. And the whole scene is so simple and beautiful that I have to pause and just take it in. What? Isa asks, noticing my stare. Nothing, I say. Just this us. How good it is. She sets down her tablet and comes over to wrap her arms around me from behind. It is good, isn't it? The best, I say. We've been in a good place for a while now. More than a year since our kitchen table conversation. More than a year since I tore up those divorce papers. And every day has been a choice to keep building, keep communicating, keep loving each other better than we did the day before. It hasn't been perfect. We've had arguments and frustrations and moments when the old patterns threaten to resurface. But we've also had tools now, therapy, communication techniques, a shared commitment to honesty that help us navigate the rough patches without falling back into silence. My job at the nonprofit has been incredible. I was promoted to director of programs last month, which came with a modest raise and a lot more responsibility. But more importantly, I wake up excited to go to work most days, which is something I'd never experienced in corporate life. Isa's practice has been thriving. She took on a more senior role at her clinic, mentoring younger therapists and developing new treatment protocols. I can see how much she loves it, how fulfilled she is by the work. And we've started talking about kids again. Not urgently, not with pressure, just exploring the possibility. Opening the conversation back up after years of letting it lie dormant. I think we'd be good parents, Issa said a few weeks ago, lying in bed after a particularly nice dinner with friends who'd brought their toddler along. I think we've learned enough about communication and partnership that we could actually handle it. You think? I asked. I think, she said. If you want to. I want to, I said. Not right away, but someday soon. Yeah. She'd smiled at me in the dark, and I'd seen the future there. Not the perfect Pinterest-worthy version, but the real one. The messy, beautiful, hard, wonderful reality of building a life together. Now, as I flip pancakes and Allah moves back to the table with her coffee, I think about how I almost missed this. How I was hours, maybe minutes, away from setting into motion a series of events that would have destroyed the best thing in my life. And I think about that night, the night I overheard her on the phone, and how it felt like the universe intervening, giving me information I needed, showing me the truth I'd been too scared to see. You know what? I realized, I say, plating the pancakes and bringing them to the table. What's that? Issa asks, accepting her plate with a smile. That the worst night of my life was also the best night of my life. She knows immediately what I'm talking about. When you heard me crying to Lauren and Jenna. Yeah, it was awful hearing how much pain you were in, realizing how badly I'd failed you. But it was also the wake-up call I needed. The thing that made me stop and actually look at what I was about to throw away. Divine intervention, she says with a slight smile. Maybe, I say, or just dumb luck. Either way, I'm grateful. We eat in comfortable silence for a few minutes and then Issa says, I'm grateful too, for you, for us, for the fact that we were both willing to do the work even when it was hard. We're pretty great, aren't we? I joke. The greatest, she agrees. And as we sit there in our sunny kitchen, eating pancakes on a random Sunday morning, I realize this is what happiness looks like. Not the big moments or the grand gestures, but this. The simple pleasure of breakfast with someone you love. Someone who's seen you at your worst and chose to stay. Someone who fought for you when you'd stopped fighting for yourself. Someone who loves you not in spite of your flaws, but because of your whole, complicated, beautiful self. That's the real fairy tale, I think. Not the prince and princess riding off into the sunset, but the couple who stumble through the dark forest together, moon, who get lost and scared and angry and who choose every day to keep walking side by side. That's us. That's our story. And I wouldn't change a single page. Epilogue. 3 years later. Our daughter Maya is 18 months old and currently covered in spaghetti sauce, banging her sippy cup on her high chair tray like it's a drum. Allah is trying to wipe her face while Maya shrieks with laughter and squirms away, and I'm standing in the doorway with my phone out recording the chaos. You're not helping. A call's over to me, but she's laughing too. I'm documenting, I say, for posterity for her future therapy sessions. Our daughter's going to need therapy because of the spaghetti incident? Aya asks, finally succeeding in wiping most of the sauce off Ma's face. Among other things, I joke, and Isla throws the washcloth at me. I catch it and come over to help extract Mia from the high chair. She immediately wraps her sauce, sticky hands around my neck, and I don't even care. This is my life now. Covered in various child-related substances, exhausted in ways I didn't know were possible, and happier than I've ever been. After we get Maya cleaned up and settled in the living room with her blocks, Issa and I collapsed on the couch together. It's barely 7:30 p.m. and we're both already counting down to bedtime. Remember when we thought we were tired before we had a kid? Ula says, I remember thinking I understood what tired meant, I say. I was adorably naive. She laughs and leans against me. Worth it, though. So worth it. I agree. Watching Maya stack blocks with intense concentration and her little tongue poking out the side of her mouth the way Issa's does when she's focused on something. We'd gotten pregnant about 6 months after we started trying. The pregnancy had been relatively smooth and Maya's birth had been well intense and terrifying and the most amazing thing I'd ever witnessed. Watching Isla bring our daughter into the world had given me a whole new level of respect for what she was capable of. And being a parent had given me a whole new understanding of what unconditional love meant. It had also tested our marriage in new ways. The sleep deprivation, the stress, the complete upheaval of our routine, it all could have driven us apart if we'd let it. But we didn't let it. We remembered the lessons we'd learned during our dark period. We communicated. We asked for help when we needed it. We made time for each other even when time felt impossible to find. We were honest about the hard parts and celebrated the good parts and reminded each other on the really tough days that we were a team. I was thinking, Issa says now while watching Maya play, about how different things could have been, different how if we'd divorced, if you'd actually gone through with it, we wouldn't have this. She gestures around at our house, at our daughter, at the life we've built. We wouldn't have her. The thought sends a chill through me. I don't like to think about that alternate timeline. Me neither, she says. But sometimes I do, and it makes me so grateful that you heard me that night, that you chose to stay. We chose, I correct. Both of us. Both of us, she agrees. Maya toddles over then, holding out a block to me. Duh, she says, because that's one of her 5 current words, along with mama, no, more, and uh-oh. I take the block solemnly. Thank you, Maya. This is a beautiful block. She beams at me and toddles away to get another one. And Allah says quietly, you're a good dad. You're a good mom. I count her. We're pretty good at this whole family thing, she says. And we are not perfect. We mess up plenty. We're learning as we go. We're exhausted all the time, but we're good. We're solid. We're together. That night, after Maya is finally asleep, after 3 stories, 2 songs, and 1 minor meltdown about not wanting to put on pajamas, Allah and I have what we've started calling sacred couch time. 30 minutes of just sitting together before we're both too tired to function. I love our life, Allah says, her head on my shoulder. Me, too, I say. Even the exhausting parts. Especially the exhausting parts, she says. Because it means we're building something real. I think about that, about how we've built a life from almost ruins. How we've created a family from the ashes of a marriage that nearly ended. How we've turned pain into strength and silence into communication and fear into love. Do you ever miss how things were before? I ask. When we could sleep in and be spontaneous and weren't constantly covered in various baby fluids. Sometimes, she admits. But then I think about what we have now and there's no competition. This is better. This is everything I wanted, even if I didn't know I wanted it. Yeah, I say. Same. We sit in comfortable silence for a while. And then Allah says, you know what I think about sometimes? What? That phone call with Lauren and Jenna. How you could have just not listened or listened and not changed your mind. How there were so many points where this could have gone differently. Sliding doors, I say, referencing the movie we watched once about parallel timelines. Exactly. In one version, we're divorced right now. Maybe remarried to other people. Maybe miserable and wondering what went wrong. And in this version, we're here with Maya with each other building this beautiful, complicated life together. I like this version, I say. Me, too. She says, I really like this version. Later, lying in bed, I think about what she said, about the different timelines, the different choices, the moment when everything could have shattered, but somehow miraculously held together. And I think about all the people out there who are where we were, standing on the edge of giving up, convinced that their partner has stopped loving them, too proud or scared or hurt to just ask. I think about the silence that's killing marriages all over the world every day. And I hope they find their moment, their kitchen table conversation, their wake-up call. I hope they choose to stay, to fight, to love loudly. Because marriage is hard, partnership is hard. Life is hard. But it's so much easier when you do it together. When you choose honesty over assumption, when you choose vulnerability over pride, when you choose love again and again, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult. That's the secret. I think the thing nobody tells you about marriage. It's not about finding the perfect person or having the perfect relationship or never struggling. It's about finding someone worth struggling with. Someone worth fighting for. Someone you choose over and over in 1,000 small ways every day. Isa stirs beside me and I pull her closer and she murmurs something in her sleep that sounds like my name. And I think this is what I almost lost. But I didn't lose it. We saved it together. And that makes all the difference. If you're reading this and you recognize yourself in our story, if you're living in that terrible silence, if you're considering walking away, if you've convinced yourself that your partner doesn't love you anymore, I want to tell you something. Ask. Just ask. Have the scary conversation. Say the hard things. Be vulnerable enough to admit you're hurting. Because you might be surprised by what you hear. You might find out that the person you thought had given up is actually just waiting for permission to try again. You might discover that the distance you've been feeling is mutual and that you're both desperate to close it, but neither of you knows how. You might save something you didn't realize could still be saved. Or you might find out that it really is over, that you've grown into different people who want different things, and that's painful, but at least it's honest. But either way, you'll know. You'll have tried. You won't spend the rest of your life wondering what would have happened if you'd just been brave enough to speak. Isa and I got lucky. We got a second chance, courtesy of a conversation I was never meant to hear. But you don't need to rely on luck or eavesdropping. You can create your own second chance. You can tear up your own metaphorical divorce papers. You can choose to stay, to fight, to love. All you have to do is speak and listen and believe that what you have, what you built together is worth fighting for because it probably is. It probably, really, really is. Final reflection. It's Sunday morning again. Years removed from that other Sunday morning when I almost told Allah I wanted a divorce. The sun is streaming through the same kitchen windows, but everything else is different. Better. Mia is at the table with us now, eating pancakes with slightly better coordination than when she was 18 months old, though she's still managing to get syrup in her hair. Isa is telling her a story about a brave little girl who goes on an adventure, and Maya is listening with wide eyes, occasionally interjecting with, "And then what?" I'm watching them, my wife and my daughter, and I'm thinking about choices. About the choice I almost made to walk away. About the choice Isa made to keep loving me even when I made it nearly impossible. About the choice we both made to do the hard work of rebuilding. About all the small choices we've made every day since then, to keep choosing each other. And I'm thinking about how marriage is really just that, an infinite series of choices. To stay or to go, to speak or to stay silent, to assume or to ask, to give up or to try again, to love or to let fear win. Every day we make these choices, sometimes consciously, sometimes without even realizing it. And the accumulation of those choices, thousands and thousands of them over years, becomes your life, becomes your love story, becomes your family. I chose well in the end. We both did. But it was so close. Daddy, more syrup, Mia demands, holding out her plate. Say, please, Isla prompts. Please, Mia says, beaming. I pour more syrup and Isla catches my eye over our daughter's head and she smiles at me with so much love and warmth that I feel it in my chest. I love you. I mouth. I love you. She mouths back. And Maya, oblivious to our exchange, goes back to demolishing her pancakes with the enthusiasm that only a small child can muster for breakfast foods. This is it. This is the life I almost lost. The family I almost never had. The love I almost threw away. And I'm grateful. So grateful that I was in the right place at the right time to overhear the truth I needed to hear. That Allah loved me, that she hadn't given up, that we were worth fighting for. That's the real story, I think. Not that I was ready to divorce my wife, but that I heard what she really felt and chose to fight instead. That we both chose to fight and we won. Not against each other, but against the silence and the fear and the pride that almost destroyed us. We won our marriage back. And that victory, quiet and private and unwitnessed by anyone but us, is the most important thing I've ever done. The best choice I've ever made. The greatest love story I'll ever live. So if you're out there standing where I stood, contemplating walking away, stop, listen, ask, fight. 'Cause the person you're about to leave might be waiting for the exact same thing you are. Permission to try again. Hope that it's not too late. Proof that you still care. And if you give them that, if you're brave enough to be vulnerable and honest and scared together, you might just save something beautiful, something worth saving, something that years from now you'll look back on and think, thank God we chose each other. Thank God we stayed. Thank God for second chances and scary conversations and the courage to try again. Thank God for love. The messy, imperfect, hard-won kind. The kind that saves you when you're drowning. The kind that rebuilds what's broken. The kind that says, I choose you even when it's difficult. Especially when it's difficult. That's the kind of love worth having. That's the kind of love worth fighting for. And that's the kind of love I have with Allah. Still, always, forever.